Hey everyone, welcome to the Mighty Books Podcast, where we sit down and chat with mighty authors about their books, message, writing successes, struggles, and other relevant authorship topics. I'm your host, Ryan M. Oliver, author of the Beasts of Men and Gods series. Now let's get started on today's chat. This episode's featured author is Andy Becker. Andy Becker is a writer, gardener, and lifetime learner who lives in Western Washington among the cedar trees with his wife Donna and their two dogs, Nova and Splash. Andy was a successful small-town lawyer who found respite from the vicissitudes of fighting for the little guy against insurance companies by gardening, hiking, and camping with his family, and by expanding his spirituality through Judaism. During his early years of gardening, he was often frustrated, beset by rocky soil, hills, and too many slugs and deer. Despite these challenges, Andy has never failed to grow vegetables every spring and summer. His current garden includes a greenhouse, 8 raised beds, a 30-yard vegetable bed, and a 40-yard stretch of raspberry vines. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Mighty Books Podcast. Today with me, I have Andy Becker. Andy, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Thank you for coming and taking time out of your busy schedule. So today we're here to talk about the spiritual forest. So what is the spiritual forest about?
The spiritual forest is about encouraging everybody to have an environmental ethic from a spiritual perspective. So when I say spiritual, what do I mean? I'm not necessarily talking about an organized religion. I think spiritual at its very basic means generosity, kindness, love, caring. And if we're talking about the spiritual forest, we're talking about our own roots because we all come from the earth. Our environment is having a lot of trouble right now. Issues have been politicized. So I'm trying to raise consciousness about trees, about planting trees, about caring for the environment, about caring for nature and connecting to nature. Just really, Ryan, trying to raise consciousness about trees and the environment.
So what was the tipping point that made you want to write about this topic in general?
Well, thanks for that question. Indulge my answer because it's a bit of a long one. I wrote a book that got published in 2019, where I took two subject matters that were kind of like my favorite long-term hobbies, long-term, over 20 years each. One was gardening, and I've been a happy gardener, a frustrated gardener, a successful and a failed gardener for years and years and years. And then I took another subject matter, Judaism and spirituality. And I really got into Judaism about 20 years ago. And about 20 years ago, I also moved to the present house that has a flat yard, good sandy, loamy soil. And I would say my Judaism, my spiritual reading, my observance, my attending services took off, and my gardening took off around the same time. So as writers, we want to write what we know about. So I wrote this book, The Spiritual Gardener. It's a book with my own experiences, but I put together gardening tasks with spiritual ideas. For example, TikTok Early Spring Gardener is about getting out there in March and April when it's cold and wet and nasty and doing the weeding and getting those radish seeds planted, planting some spinach or some beets. But it's also about time management from a spiritual perspective. What do the Jewish sages say about time management? That's one example. Another chapter is called Raspberry Jam. It's about growing raspberries, making jam, but it's also about the division of labor in marriage from a Jewish spiritual perspective. I have a chapter about how for years I wanted a greenhouse, and finally I took the leap and bought a greenhouse kit and all the troubles I had building it. But then my friend showed up and he's like, "Don't worry, Andy, we'll slap this together." So the theme there, the greenhouse chapter, is about having a best friend, which is something in spiritual thought that is important for people. So when I was doing the research on Judaism for the Spiritual Gardener, I kept finding references again and again and again about trees, about nature, about forest. What does it mean in Judaism where every religious service they say, man is like a tree of the field. Why is there a holiday called Tu B'Shvat, which is called the birthday for trees? Why do we have this commandment that says that you do not destroy trees in times of war? Where do all these things come from? So I was learning more about Judaism, learning more about trees when I wrote The Spiritual Gardener. So it was just a natural outgrowth to make it a series. So now I've written The Spiritual Forest. So each chapter is about trees or particular species of trees in Jewish spiritual thought. So I'm weaving the two together. And the purpose of the Gardener book was to encourage people to get outside, smell the earth, make friends with an earthworm, enjoy a garden, lower their environmental footprint. The purpose of the Spiritual Forest is to encourage people to care about the environment and to get out there and plant a tree.
So they kind of coincide together, but they can also be great solo reads as well.
They're great solo reads. Each book is a good gift book. The Spiritual Gardener is illustrated by a UW Masters in Fine Art lady, very beautiful young lady named Abigail Drapkin. You can look at her art on her website. It's spectacular. And those are watercolors in The Spiritual Gardener. In The Spiritual Forest, we put together photographs, black and white photographs. And in each book, each chapter stands alone. For example, my wife has a very close friend, maybe a best friend, who tells me that she likes to have each book on her bedstand because she just wants to read one or two chapters and it brings her a certain peace and meditative feeling, a contemplative feeling, a happy feeling before, she turns off the light, cuts tree, saws some logs. Yeah, I think each book stands alone, and each chapter in each book also stands alone. I'll add one more thing, Ryan, if I may. Each book has 18 chapters. In Judaism, the number 18 for the mystical Jews, the Kabbalists, corresponds to the letters of the word Chai, C-H-A-I. Chai means life. So you've probably heard the expression L'chaim, where we're celebrating the new year, we're celebrating a bar mitzvah, we're celebrating a wedding, we're celebrating life, to life. From Fiddler on the Roof, the song, to life, L'chaim. So each book has 18 chapters. And in The Spiritual Forest, there's also a chapter called Etz Chaim. Etz Chaim is the tree of life. And I have a chapter devoted to that. Talk about getting into the spiritual tall trees. We know about the tree of knowledge, the tree of good and evil. I talk about that in my chapter on apples, because the apple has been horribly defamed. The apple is not the fruit that led to the fall of humankind. And I'll tell you exactly which fruit it was if you get the book. But Etz Chaim is the tree of life. And the tree of life is a very highly spiritual idea. Think about trees. Trees are kind of the respiratory system for our entire planet and all the good that trees do. And without trees, there wouldn't be human beings.
That's 100% true. And you do go into that with in The Spiritual Forest. I got to say, I was reading a little bit this morning and I read a little bit a couple days ago. And there is a sort of deep wisdom with reading about nature and human beings. And there's a little bit of history with it too. I won't give it away to those who are going to read it, or if you'll explain it too. I think in actually one of the chapters I want to talk about. So can you actually go into a little bit of detail for us listeners from the book?
Well, sure. We might start with the mission that was given to Judaism's representation of the first human being, who is Adam. And Adam was told to preserve and cultivate when he showed up in the Garden of Eden. And if you look at the very first chapter in the five books of Moses. We call the first book Bereshit, you call it Genesis. And if you look in the very first section of the very first book of the Old Testament, we have this description of creation. And of course, all the verdant trees and vegetation were created before human beings. But then here's Adam, and he's plunked down in the Garden of Eden, and he's given a mission. And his mission is clearly to preserve and cultivate, cultivate and guard the garden. Cultivate and guard it, Adam. And he's hesitant to do so. It's like too overwhelming. Can you imagine a Garden of Eden, and you're the first human being, and here's the voice of the Creator saying it's really your job to cultivate and guard what I've made for you. So that's really Adam's mission. And we look to our patriarchs in my spiritual tradition to copy and emulate those patriarchs. So we should all guard and cultivate nature, trees, and the environment. And there's a midrash, and midrash is a very famous story or commentary on the Bible. And there's a super famous midrash where God says, "See my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. And everything that I created it for you. Be careful not to spoil or destroy my world, for if you do, there will be nobody to repair it." So Adam is commanded in the positive, cultivate and guard. He's also commanded in the negative, don't destroy it. So that's the first chapter in the book in a nutshell. I guess you don't have to get the book. You've heard it from me. That's kind of a summary of the book. But what I also try and do, to be serious, Ryan, is at the end of each chapter, I like to give the reader practical ideas and things to think about and to-dos. Should I start a garden? Should I plant a tree? If I belong to a temple, a synagogue, a mosque, a church, is there an opportunity to reduce my organization's environmental footprint? How about at work? What can I do to reduce the environmental footprint there?
Wow, that's quite the explanation, quite the background.
Well, you give me the pulpit, man, you're in trouble. I can talk for a long time on all these subject matters.
Oh yeah, I mean, you kind of wrote the book on it, so I mean that's a part of it. So, and I will say there's a certain amount, like I said, wisdom with reading it. Very, as you said before, you mentioned your wife's friend reading it before bed, kind of calms her down before. It was interesting this morning, kind of hustle and bustle, and I picked up your book to read it, or on the computer screen, got a digital copy to read over it, and it did kind of settle me into our conversation. Maybe focus on, because I don't know anything about Judaism. I'm not really much of a gardener. I do like being outside, but it kind of settled me in, and it really just honed in on the ideas of connecting to nature. So I appreciate what you put into this.
Well, thank you.
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it. And it is a secular book. I mean, it's just that my spiritual tradition is Judaism. But let's be clear. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not a professor of religion. I'm just a regular guy, I'm not a forester. I'm not a botanist or forestry biologist. But I think there's a big disconnect. I mean, I don't know about you, Ryan, but I see a lot of people who are very stressed out these days. They're too busy. I see people who are worried and upset about politics. And I'm saying, let's get in the garden. Let's have contemplative time in the park that's near you. Let's go for a walk in the forest. And, one of my favorite experiences in terms of spirituality, we have, if you drive through Oregon and California on 101, you can really enjoy our beautiful redwoods and also our sequoias. We have some trees that are on our west coast that are as old as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Can you believe that? And if you get out of the car and you walk among the redwoods and you feel that soft flooring and you smell the air and you see the shafts of light coming from above through the canopy of the trees, I mean, that's a holy experience right there.
Mm-hmm.
And our sages and people way more wiser than me said, we're disconnected from nature. Nature's our source. So I'm trying not to be at all preachy in this book. I'm just trying to say what others have said and what the great sages of yesteryear have told us over and over again is connect to nature, have contemplative time amongst the trees, amongst the grasses, and connect to creation itself.
It's just it's a healthy thing to do with just going outside and enjoying yourself. People, I feel, are just too immersed in technology and what their busy lifestyle to really take a step back and enjoy what we already have at our disposal here outside and not man-made. Reconnect with everything. We really need to get back into a lot of that. A lot of people I've found who have started doing more outdoor adventures, they just have a certain resonance to them, a calming factor to them. They'll just, things come up, they don't worry about it too much. It's just not, they've kind of seen the kind of, I don't know, they had a different perspective now. They go, yeah, this is kind of important, but I mean, grand scheme of things, this is small compared to what we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
You know, there's a very famous quote from a guy named Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Let me break that down for you, Ryan. So rabbi, that means teacher. Yochanan, that's the Hebrew for Jonathan. So Rabbi John or Johnny, Ben is son of Zakkai, Zach. So Rabbi John, son of Zach, used to say, if you have a sapling in your hand and somebody comes to you and says, come and greet the Messiah, first plant the sapling and then go and meet the Messiah. So let's break that down. What does that mean? If you're doing a good deed, if you're doing something positive, you have a sapling in your hand, first plant the sapling. Yes, there's something sensationalistic going on. Yes, there's a blaring headline. Yes, there's something that wants to distract us. But if you're doing a task that's a good deed, that's a mitzvah, complete the mitzvah, complete the good task, and then go and worry about that big headline in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. Also, I think this quote underscores the value that religion puts on nature and the value of trees. First, plant the sapling. So that really ties into what you're saying. People are disconnected. Don't be like tumbleweed, blowing this way and that way, with your head spinning at the nearest fashion, the latest electronic gizmo. My God, I've got my big screen TV, I've got my smartphone, I've got my pad, I've got my desktop monitor. I mean, my world is full of these rectangles right now. But when am I happiest? Am I happiest clicking around, or am I happiest when I'm out in the park, really walking with my wife or my son, my grandchildren, my daughter-in-law? When are you happiest? When you're, enjoying your kids, Ryan, being outside, playing and frolicking and so forth, or when you're all individually? I mean, you have families now, they're all together in the family room, the TV's on, but every single person is looking at their own electronic rectangular device. Nobody's talking to each other.
Exactly. Not as much connectivity.
Have you ever been in the same room with your wife, Ryan, where you start texting each other?
No, I try really hard not to do that. No, not really. Maybe in weird social, events where we're trying to keep a message between the two of us, but usually there's eye contact and we're normally very good about communicating most of the time. At least she is. I sometimes just, turn the old ears off, but that's just, you know,
Well, I'll tell you, I
me.
want to encourage everybody to get outside and plant trees. It may not seem like a logical thing. Maybe there's not an immediate payoff, but that tree is going to grow over time. You're going to watch it grow over time. You're going to enjoy all the benefits that that tree brings, whether you're conscious of it or not. And that tree is also an act of generosity because that tree is serving not just you, but it's serving the planet and serving all sorts of other people you may not even know. And it may go on living long, long after you're pushing up daisies yourself.
Very forward thinking of people who are planting trees because, like you said, it's not an instant gratification thing, which a lot of people nowadays are looking for. That patient over time reward that, like you said, you might not even experience it, but your children or your grandchildren could experience it. And that's the whole point is we want to enjoy life. We want some of that gratification, but it's not just about instant gratification for us. It's also about looking to the future generations for our children and for the planet itself. Because I don't want these trees, we got a pretty decent, backyard with quite a few trees, a green belt behind us. Looks like we're kind of in the forest. I don't want that to go away. I want that to stay there because it is beautiful. It is healing if you're having a stressful day, going outside and just enjoying the air and the trees and all the animals inside of it. There is a certain amount of peace you get from looking and being around the forest.
Absolutely. I do have a chapter in both books called The Old Catalpa, and it's about a favorite tree that we have. It's a catalpa tree. It makes really broad leaves, and it was shade, kind of the air conditioner for the house. It has a bottom trunk that, boys particularly, but boys and girls between the ages of, say, about 8 and 14 find irresistible, and they would climb up the tree. And it also created a wonderful canopy for all the nestlings, all the little birds, especially in springtime. And we'd get that first hot day in May or June and come and sit in the shade of the tree and listen to all the birds in the nest up there that we couldn't quite see. And it's nice to have a favorite tree, or to plant a tree in honor of a birthing, a wedding, in anything, a grandchild. We have a little place where when our first grandson was born, we named it his forest. We had some dead trees that were hazard trees that had to be removed. So we were quick to take some cedar tree seedlings and plant them. And we call it my grandson's forest. So we hope when he's older, he'll enjoy these trees.
That's awesome. So that kind of segues into one of your chapters. I was reading about, I think it was one of the very first ones, planting a tree. It sounded like the lesson in it is like hospitality and persuasion. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, well, we look to our patriarchs, and Abraham made a treaty and lived for many, many years in a place called Beersheba, which means literally well of the oath. And he was respected by the king in that territory. And the first thing he did was he planted a tamarisk tree. Well, the tamarisk tree grows really well in the desert. And what Abraham exemplified was outreach and hospitality. So he was a monotheist. He was spreading monotheism in a world that was full of idolatry at that time. So what better way to persuade people than through hospitality and outreach? So he would invite travelers, hot and dusty from traveling through the desert, to come hang out at his place under the tamarisk trees, and he'd say, "Come, wash, eat, relax, and all you have to do in exchange is give credit to God who created all this, and come and rest, enjoy the shade." So that was how he tried to persuade people. That's how he tried to spread his message, through hospitality and kindness. And I think if we want to get a message across, sometimes it makes sense to hit the streets and protest. I mean, that's the piss and vinegar way. But the best way, really, in the long term, is the milk and honey way. If you want to convince somebody of something, especially in a very discordant, fractured, noisy world, let's choose the path of kindness. Let's choose the path of persuasion. Let's raise consciousness about trees in the environment. Let's lower the temperature of some of these, TV panels and whatnot. And let's approach things with more spirituality, with more, loving kindness. And that's the way to raise consciousness and to penetrate to, your idea, to communicate a little better. And people love the environment. People love our parks. People love trees. People love fruit trees, ornamental trees, forests, you bet. So it's hard to be against trees.
It really is. They're not very invasive. They're beautiful. Out in the Pacific Northwest, especially, I was blown away by a trip we did back out to the Quinault rainforest. This is, beginning of when my wife and I just got married after our first anniversary. We went out to there. There's a resort out there, and just how persistent and flexible these trees are, how strong they are, resilient. They actually took a redwood from California, brought it up here, and planted it in Washington. It's not very old considering how old redwoods can get. That thing grew so fast and so tall because of the amount of rainfall that we get out there. It was just stunning that a tree not native to this area could do so well up here. It was very interesting to see that. So the resilience of trees and the beauty of them is always impressed me.
Yeah, trees are really interesting. I mean, usually in nature, water runs downhill. We're used to seeing that. We don't see water going uphill ever. But in trees, we have what the botanists tell us is conduction. And in trees, there are in the canopy ways that the leaves absorb moisture, but most of the moisture for the trees is going in the opposite direction of how water normally flows. And the roots of trees, how trees work, it's really a fascinating subject if you like botany, and it's easy to read about.
Yeah, they are really fascinating. When we were still out there, there was a forest tour, which of course, when I first heard this, I'm like, a forest tour? Like, what can you learn just by, going out and looking at trees? I mean, like, really didn't kind of grasp this, but I decided, heck with it. We're out here. Why not go for it? And the tour guide was marvelous. He walked us through, different areas where people had tried to live, where certain places were clear cutted, and how rapidly that area was coming back, how certain trees on certain areas affected how like the streams would flow through areas, how it would affect different animals from living. It was very interesting, all interconnected. It was almost just like a network. It was a network between one tree and the other one. They said if you'd lost one tree in a huge, cost there, that loss would be felt amongst the other trees as well. But the roots were so indebted there, they'd actually live for quite a long time afterwards, still supporting the network, even though the main tree had fallen already. So it was really interesting when he went through it. I did not realize there was that much into trees at the time. Again, this is 10 years ago. It was really interesting.
Well, there is an interconnectedness between a lot of different species of trees. For example, sequoia trees, which are such mighty, phenomenal trees that John Muir extolled so much in his writing. And you can go visit. We have both Yosemite and Sequoia National Park, and in the Sierras, where we have these sequoias that are literally thousands of years old. Their roots are quite shallow, but their roots are intertwined with each other. And that symbolizes the value of community, how people can be like trees and hold each other up. It's not always about just individual strength. It's also about the strength of community. And trees, in many, many instances, exemplify that in their root structures.
Yeah, that's growing more and more apparent as I've read a couple of your chapters and just pulling back some experience I've had from my younger years, just out and about in the forest. So to kind of circle back a little bit, I hear you're teaching a writing class, yes?
I have a continuing education class that I've done for TCC called the 11 Commandments of Writing. And I've really enjoyed it. My students are a small group of aspiring writers. And the purpose of this class is just to kind of encourage them and to give them help and tips on getting their writing going.
Awesome. How many students do you have right now?
I think we have 5.
Okay. That's a good number. I like that small number.
Perfect. It's perfect because everybody really shares and opens up and talks a lot.
Yeah, when you have a smaller number like that, people can get a little more comfortable and will share more, I would say, personal things about themselves or about what they're going through versus a more, a larger, less formal or a more formal group. So informality for learning, I feel like, is generally a better area, which I like that quite a bit. And you said that earlier on before we started that you actually got invited to start speaking.
Well, I've been speaking since the gardening book came out. It's just a topic people enjoy, and I've spoken to various groups, including community centers, synagogues. I've spoken at nurseries. I got invited to speak this week, and I'm looking forward to the Horsehead Bay Garden Club. So that'll be fun. And they have an annual luncheon, and apparently there's about 30 people who come to these. So I'm very flattered, and I'll talk about probably one of the chapters in my gardening book, and it'll be fun. All the gardening talks that I've done are always fun. People love gardening, and it's just a great subject to talk about.
Heck yeah, that's awesome. That's great. So with having the spiritual garden and then now the spiritual forest, are you planning on having another one like that come out, or just kind of trying to ride the high of getting this book done? Because I know it's a challenge to get books done. So I know you're super excited to get this off the ground and out there in the world, but do you see yourself doing any more gardening books in the future?
Well, the Spiritual Gardener and the Spiritual Forest are listed online as 2 books in the Spiritual Garden series. So to have a true series, I'm going to have to do number 3. So stay tuned. Number 3 is coming. I don't have any specifics for you quite yet. There may be a novel that I write in between. I'm not, welded at the hip to being a particular brand. I like to write what I like. And as writers, I can tell you, you better like what you write, because in the writing and editing process, you're going to read your own writing over again so many times. You better enjoy your own writing.
That is sage advice. I will say that right now. That is absolutely paramount with getting through the huge task of writing and producing and editing and publishing a book. That is 100% true right there. And from what I've read from yours, everything is just it's so nice to read. I will say you have some writing that you get through like, okay, that's kind of hard to get through. You're very smooth. Very smooth, very nice, actually calming, quite calming too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So at the end of the day, what do you want people to learn from your book? I think you've already mentioned a little bit, but just to kind of summarize that.
Yeah, I just want people to go out and plant a tree. I want people to go and enjoy the forest. I want people to think about, well, what can I do to be more environmentally conscious? What actions can I take on a daily basis? I'm a lifetime learner. There are things I can do every day to be more environmentally friendly. And I'm approaching it not from a scientific or political viewpoint. I'm approaching it from a spiritual viewpoint. And I think we're suffering a lot of spiritual malaise in our society. I see people who are just depressed and stressed out. And, get outside, walk amongst the trees. In springtime, start a garden. It's the most wonderful antidepressant I can think of. And in fact, I'll tell you, Ryan, there are actual studies by sociologists, psychologists, medical doctors on gardening. Gardening definitely lowers depression, lowers blood pressure. It has all sorts of health benefits. There's even a study from Australia that says if you're over age 60 and you're a gardener, that your chances of suffering dementia or Alzheimer's are reduced by 60%. Now, when I'm in the house and it's time to go outside, I don't say to my wife, Donna, hey, Donna, I'm going to go lower my dementia chances by 60%. I say, hey, Donna, I'm going to go out to the greenhouse. I'm going to go, do some weeding now. I'm going to go plant the carrot seeds. I'm not thinking of some study, but the fact is, if you want calm, if you want peace of mind, if you want a place to contemplate, there's no better place to lower that blood pressure than out in the garden bed, out in the forest, out in that community park with your dog. Enjoy the outside.
I love that advice. That is excellent advice. And then lastly, I want everyone to know where they can get copies of not just The Spiritual Forest, but The Spiritual Gardener as well, and your other two books. Where can they go and get your books, Andy?
Thank you. Well, I have an author website if you want to buy either the print or digital copies of any of my books. The website is my name, Andy Becker, all one word, ANDYBECKER .life. AndyBecker.life. Andy Becker period life. Also, you can ask the library for my books. I know a couple of my books are in the library. Also, you can go online to your favorite bookstores, and you'll see me online very, very all over the place, including that behemoth one that is the biggest bookstore, whose name I won't mention today. But yeah, I've sold quite a few books on the unmentionable Amazon. So wherever you want to go to buy the book, andybecker.life. You can also email me at andybecker.life.com or at gmail.com. And I'm happy to, mail you a book. I don't charge shipping when you buy direct from me. I try and give you a little discount, a little break on that score.
I like it. Well, thank you very much for that as well. And Andy, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule of gardening and speaking and promoting your book and all your books. Like I said, thank you so much for coming on today with us.
Ryan, it's a pleasure. And I just want to let everybody know that these are gift books. They make good presents. We've got holidays coming up very shortly. We already hit December. I don't know how that happened, but here we are in December. If you want to get the book, I'll get it out. If you get it direct from me, I'll get it out quickly, or get it online. You can get it in plenty of time for that favorite person who loves trees or gardening in your life. And thank you so much, Ryan. I've enjoyed it today.
I have very much too. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. It has been a great time, and I'll catch you on the next one. Are you an author? Do you know someone who is? If so, then message me, Ryan Oliver, at ryanmoliver.com to set up a free appointment to discuss being showcased on the Mighty Books podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the Mighty Books YouTube channel and share the link to this and more episodes with your friends and family. Thanks for listening. So long for now. Stay mighty and keep reading.